Thank you, band. Well, we have a concise scripture lesson today. It's from 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it for the glory of God. This is the word of the Lord. Well, today is less of a sermon and more of a State of the Union address from the pastor. Apologize to any of our visitors here today. However, I think there's some edifying thoughts to consider as we go forth. Congregation, we need a new building. And I want to talk about that today. I remember when they were interviewing me for the pastoral position. And in the midst of the interview, it was pointed out that, oh yeah, we're $2 million in debt and we need a new facility built. And it was said rather casually, which shocked me because I thought $2 million was a lot of money to be in debt. And the thing about the interview was I interviewed that evening, and then the next morning I flew to Chicago and then to Rome to go on a Mediterranean cruise. And so we'd get up the next day, we'd make all that travel, get out onto the boat, and finally I have an opportunity to talk about the interview with the Lord. And so I go out on the deck, and as I start to walk, I made a joke with the Lord. Hey, Lord, when I said I was looking for a church with a $2 million budget, I meant in the black, not the red. And then he said, I will raise the money. So, I like to think I have a pretty close relationship with God, but it's not usually I ask him a question and he answers it, and I don't think he's ever responded to any of my jokes. And I thought, wow, my first conversation with the Lord about this church received a supernatural response. And so I figured he was going to be bringing me here, and he did. And friends, the Lord has been faithful because that $2 million debt is already cut down to 1.1. And as soon as I arrived, it became obvious that we needed a new facility. Our children's program was already turning people away. But I couldn't jump in and start orchestrating a new building because the church needed time to adjust to the new guy. See, one of the hardest times in a church's life is when they transition from their founding pastor to their next pastor. And not only did we have a fantastic founding pastor, we had an amazing associate pastor. And so it was an adjustment for the congregation. But this congregation was too spiritually mature to fall into the third generation principle. Let me tell you what the third generation principle is. The first generation, there's a dynamic, there's an excitement, there's growth, there's energy. The church is moving and shaking. And then that first generation leader leaves. And the next generation, the second generation pastor comes in. Well, he comes in and he's usually greeted with a group of people that are so excited about what happened in the past that they want to put everything in status quo and grab hold of the past. And so that pastor leaves, the third person comes in, and that is a generation of decline. Well, that didn't happen here because this congregation was so faith-focused, the idea of pining for the past and halting forward momentum just wasn't part of our DNA. And we had some significant issues to deal with. We had a Lake Nona launch that took place. We had a couple of bouts with the denominational issues over the same-sex complexities. But while all this transition was taking place, we didn't sit in our hands. No. We noticed that there was quite a bit of poverty out on 192, so we hired Mary Downing, and we built the Hope Center, which is now ministering to thousands of people. And through the 6 years that I've been here, we've added quite a number of programs, and we've sustained a continuous growth pattern. So much so that it's apparent that we have to expand our facilities to accommodate our programs. Friends, the presence of Jesus Christ is too strong in our church to remain at status quo. And this means practically we have to build because our programs are competing for space. But spiritually, we have to expand because this is part of our calling, to use our Christianity in every way possible to bring as many as possible into a relationship with Jesus Christ. This church happens to have a contagious Christianity about it. We have a faith that's grounded in a relationship with the living God. Okay? We're not trying to follow some biblical rules or to subscribe to a philosophy or maintain a historical tradition. No, our faith is a very vibrant interaction with God. And out of that comes our calling to go make disciples, to be His ambassadors to this world, to align our hearts with God, who desires all to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth. I think one of the more powerful pieces of Scripture is 1 Corinthians 8:6. We exist for Him. And it's a lot of fun for me to share this message with you because I don't need to chastise you. Okay? You are a generous congregation. You support the ministry. In fact, we've had 2 record years in a row. It's kind of funny, the leaders came up to me and said, Pastor, we don't want you to preach stewardship sermons anymore. And so I didn't, and we had a record year of giving. The next year they came back, remember last year? No stewardship sermons. We had another record year. So either I'm not very good at preaching stewardship sermons, or you're a congregation that just responds to messages about Jesus Christ. Now, when we talk about building, questions get raised. What about the economy? What about the political chaos going on in our nation? The international unrest? What about refugees? The cultural and theological shifts in marriage and sexuality? I mean, there's so much unrest. This is a horrible time to think about building. Well, actually, friends, if you're worried about this world going to hell in a handbasket, that this political climate is sizing up for the end times, then I was going to say that there's no better time to invest in the church. Do you remember when Elijah had that challenging moment with his political and social situation and got scared and ran to the mountain of God? And the Lord meets him. And what does he say? What are you doing here? He doesn't say, oh, poor Elijah. I'm sorry that you're going through so much. I know it's been overwhelming. So glad to see you. I mean, because that's what Elijah did. He said, Lord, you have to know that, everybody's attacking the faith and I'm the only one left. And God said, actually, I have thousands who are following me. You get back to your calling. Quit hiding from the challenges of the world. I've called you to represent me in this world. You worry about my kingdom, and I'm going to take care of all of your worries and all of your needs, and even give you the desires of your heart. You know what the Bible tells us. I will fight for you. I will care for you. This is the Lord to whom we belong. A couple of weeks ago, I was in Jordan. And Jordan's a 98% Muslim country, and our guide was an Arab Christian. And so, we were interested in talking to him. He's an Arab, he's a Christian, so we talked politics and international situations. And my traveling companion shared with the guide that, he was a little bit leery of our church building project. He thought the political times were just too insecure. To which the Arab Christian responded, you have to build a church. I mean, in his mind, it was a foregone conclusion. If you're a Christian, you invest in building the Church of Jesus Christ. And for him to say this was challenging because, you see, he shared that he's watched those Arab Springs happen around the other countries and knows that it's a possibility that's going to hit his. And when it does, Christians tend to get slaughtered. But he's not living in fear. No, for him, advancing Christ's cause is the reason why we live. And you meet a guy like that and you get inspired. Suddenly you don't care about things of this world because you supposed to be thinking about what matters most, heaven. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun when we get to heaven and we meet people that are there because of our faith. I mean, that means our Christianity wasn't about me, myself, and I. But no, we allowed God access into our lives. And now we have eternal significance and stories. Because, friends, what we do here on earth has heavenly ramifications. Now, I got to tell you, as a pastor, one of the greatest fears about a capital campaign is you'll say, sure, I'd love to give to the capital campaign. And so you give to the capital campaign instead of the general budget. And we need the general budget to maintain our ministry while we add to our facilities. And I know that many of us, we've been digging down deep to empower our ministry here. And now the pastor is hitting you up for more. And friends, this is where that whole who owns you question comes into play. Why do you live? To be comfortable? Or are you carrying out God's assignment? Because as a Christian, we have a calling to live with and for Him. And there comes a moment when all of us have to decide, are we really living for Him? You know, I read this story about a man who was in Vietnam, and he saw these two people out in the field, and one of them had a harness over his shoulders, and then there was a man behind him with the reins, and they were plowing the field, and the people in the car said, well, what's going on here? This is human slavery. This is horrible. Pull over, driver. So they pull over, and they start to chastise this man. You're a brutal monster using a human as an animal. He said, what are you talking about? We're a couple of Christians, and, well, we're trying to build a sanctuary for our church, and so we sold our ox so that we could give the proceeds to the church so that they could build a new building. And, well, now this is how we take care of business. That's the sacrifice they made. And when asked about it, they said, well, think about the sacrifice He made for us. You know, Jesus Christ, He gave Himself for us totally. I mean, He didn't just give us a divine gallbladder, okay? He gave all of Himself to us. Friends, we're talking about the Creator sacrificing Himself for you and me. Raises the question, how do we respond? I mean, again, we're a generous congregation. There's no chastising going on. But lots of Christians give about 1% of their income to the church. Some give 2%. Some, do better, give 5%, 6%, 7%. I know this, that in our congregation, if everybody gave 10%, we would have a $6 million budget. Just the way it works. And as I talk about numbers, I want to remind you, this building project isn't about money. This is about people meeting Jesus Christ. That's the only reason we're doing it. This is going to be a hassle for me. Okay? This is going to be a burden on the church. And we can say, well, that's too much, we're not going to bother. Or we can step into our responsibility and say, you know what? We need to make sure that people are being cared for. And there's so many people out there living lonely lives. You know, I read this story about Mammy Adams. She'd always go to the post office because they were so friendly to her. And, well, she went just before Christmas to buy some stamps, and the line was extremely long. And somebody pointed out to her, you don't need to wait in line to get stamps. There's a stamp machine in the lobby. And she said, I know, but the machine's not going to ask me about my arthritis. There's so many people out there who want that personal touch, who need what we Christians have, a touch from God. Well, I told my wife what I wanted to give, and she reminded me, William, we are still paying off 2 college tuition bills, and our car is on the way out. And then she muttered something about the Harley. And as I reflected on what I would like to give, I realized it'll be a stretch. And every time I feel the pinch, I'm going to remind myself why I'm doing this. It's to please the Lord. It's going to infuse into every stress and strain divine purpose. I'm going to activate God into the everyday. And speaking of God, let me remind you, we're talking about a God who longs to be gracious to you. A God whose eyes move to and fro upon this earth, seeking to strongly support those whose hearts belong to Him. Now, I'll tell you, I've been praying about this project for years, and I'll confess that I've been praying that someone's going to swoop in with the big check and take care of business so that we can just go on as business as usual. That's been my prayer. You know, I don't want to stop preaching about Jesus and His love. In fact, part of the fear of a capital campaign is all my colleagues have said, oh, you don't want to build anything, because then your whole ministry turns into being fundraising, and you have to preach on money the whole time. And I thought, oh gosh, I don't want to do that. So I sat down with the leadership and said, hey guys, you know, I don't want to be a professional fundraiser. I want to be a professional preacher who communicates the love of God through Jesus Christ. And we're going to do it that way and let God be our resource. And then I was deeply shocked and moved because a close friend of mine says, you know, Pastor, I hope somebody doesn't come in and write a big check and pay it off, because then we won't have the opportunity to participate in building our church. Again, what I perceived to be a burden, he saw as a privilege. Now, don't get me wrong. When we're talking about raising $4 million, we're going to need some big donors. That's why you have my blessing to play the lottery, okay? And I am going to say it's awe-inspiring to see how big donors carry a church. They make it possible for so many others who can't give to encounter the Lord Jesus Christ. But all of us, we give as we can. We give sacrificially. We overstretch because you and I believe that, well, the ministry of Jesus Christ is a priority. And friends, this leads me to the fact that I'm not hitting you up for money right now. I'm asking you to bring some Christianity to the table. Let's see what God's going to do through our faith. I guess I'm talking to you about your eternal legacy as we pass the baton of faith on to the next generation. The Puritan theologian Thomas Watson claimed a person's greatest care should be for that place where he lives the longest. And don't we plan on living in eternity with God? Well, this ought to be our scope. So why a new building? Well, let me tell you what's going to happen. Immediately, we're going to double the preschool, which will double our preschool income. But more importantly, it's going to double the number of kids who are being raised to seek Jesus Christ. There's all kinds of fun stories that, people will say, oh, here's a preschool, let's drop our kids in here. And so the kid comes to school here, gets a relationship with Jesus, and goes home and suddenly says, how come we don't pray over dinner like we do at preschool? And lots of theology gets taught as well from the kids to the parents. One kid went home and informed Mom, yes, Jesus played lacrosse. Mom says, I'm pretty sure he didn't play lacrosse. Kid said, yes, our teacher said he carried lacrosse. So, might have got it wrong, but the mind's in the right spot. Friends, we have numerous children's ministries that have hundreds of kids enrolled. If we can open up places for more kids, we're going to have more kids meeting Jesus Christ. We're going to expand Christ's influence in this community. Matt, who's leading our youth group, the kids are just responding to him. Numbers of kids, record numbers of middle school kids are coming to our program now. Yesterday, I was in the Starbucks and somebody said, hey, I got in trouble the other day. Why? Well, because I couldn't get my daughter to youth group on time, and I really heard about it, the kids are prioritizing this spot in their lives. And do you know that middle school kids when they give their lives to Jesus, they stay Christians for the rest of their lives. This is what statistics prove out. So when you and I invest in passing our faith on to the middle school kids, we're creating a forever relationship between them and God. And friends, this is an important factor because we are the only organization in society that teaches biblical truths and values. Nobody else does. In fact, it's banned in most places. You and I have an opportunity right now to pass on our faith in a primary way. We're going to have a Christian Life Center which will create a large space for classrooms and meetings and recreational space. And I know the kids are going to be using this all the time. And let me remind you, we have too many events that don't have space to meet. That's why we're doing this. We're now going to have enough rooms to grow, which means more people will be experiencing and sharing Jesus Christ. Now, I have made one request for the design. I've asked that when we put our bathrooms together that we have paper towels rather than those hot air dryers. The reason is one pastor pointed out that he went into the bathroom and there was a note over the dryer that read, "Push this button for a brief recorded message from our pastor." Okay? It's not going to happen here, okay? So how do you get involved? I need you to pray. I'm asking you to pray every single day for our project, okay? Every day, I need you to lift this before the Lord. Because unless the Lord builds the house, we labor in vain. And the second thing is, we need help. You know, on the seat back in front of you are a bunch of volunteer and tent cards. I'd like my members to pull these out and consider signing up. We have all kinds of detailed things where we just need help to pull off such a big project. And so help us out and get involved so that we can bring this to fruition. And friends, finally, I'm obviously hoping that you're going to consider participating financially. And I think this is going to be a fun place for all of us to test God, to step out and say, "Lord, enable me to be a giver." You know, two guys were praying about $1 million, and one said, "Lord, I hope that you'll enable me to make $1 million in my lifetime." And another guy prayed, "Lord, I hope you'll enable me to give away $1 million in my lifetime." Which prayer do you think the Lord is inclined to answer? That's the one I suggest that we offer up. And we always say, you know, when I get more, then I'll be able to give. But the Bible calls us on this. He says, those who are faithful in little, I will give much. Okay? So let's just go ahead and decide, let's be faithful. Now, I'll share, I have a couple of friends who have attitude about this whole thing. I don't think we need a new building, Pastor. I don't plan on giving. And I said, that's cool, whatever. I mean, you happen to be part of a growing church, which is a good thing. You know, so many churches are closing up or you know, decreasing in size and influence. God happens to be on the move through your church. And really growing pains, it's a good problem to have. I mean, it's not my fault that we happen to live and worship in a town where it costs $4 million to build something. And wherever you are on this project, I want you to pray hard and let this be part of your spiritual journey. Now, I want you to participate because otherwise it's going to happen and you're going to miss out on being part of this cool moment in the life of your church. Kind of like when Mordecai told Esther that she had to talk to the king about the genocide of the Jews, or else the Lord will create salvation through some other means and you will be irrelevant. Friends, let's not our faith become irrelevant. Because, friends, he told me before I even started to be your pastor that he is the source and the resource for the ministry of this church. So let's grab a hold of the Lord and watch him move powerfully through and around us and build his church. Because remember, the gates of hell are not going to prevail against his church. You are his church, which means success has been granted to you. So next week after church, we're going to stand around the yard where we're building, and we're going to pray this project into existence. Because friends, Proverbs 16:3 says, commit your works to the Lord.